So good evening. My research interest is related to the interplay between culture and education, and this is the second attempt to find evidence in psychometric measures of relevant differences across cultural groups. The first one was an analysis on PISA, OECD PISA 2015, and the analysis related all to cultural groups as regional groups in Italy and Spain. The interest for INVALSI is that okay, in the title I talk about two kinds of possible cultural differences in social cognition, and within the broader concept of social cognition, the most specific construct of theory of mind. Okay, this one. The presentation is about some theoretical viewpoints. So what I'm looking for within INVALSI data, and why the use of INVALSI compared to OECD PISA, and the first analysis, the first evidence I obtained looking at 8th graders in 2016. Using essentially an item-by-item comparison and a differential item function, descriptive comparison of answers to test items from the two groups, and the differential and the estimation of differential item functioning between a focal group, which I selected within the 20 Italian regions as putting Lombardy as a reference group, and the Sicily and Calabria united in this kind of small macro region to compare their performance item by item, and in the Italian test. And then I will tell you some cultural explanation of the findings. Limitation and something about limitations and perspective of this kind of analysis on INVALSI datasets. A few words about social cognition, which is something related to the cognitive processes people activate to evaluate a person's behavior or a social situation. It generally implies judgments and causal attributions. Why did she do that, or why he did that? Therefore, also inferences or deductions. Cultures might emphasize differently alternative outcomes and processes. And I mentioned some literature here, essentially in cultural psychology, about social cognitive processes or cross-cultural differences in social cognitive processes and in theory of mind. About theory of mind now, I say that theory of mind is it is actually a concept that comes from a philosophical problem, which is how do I understand another mind if each mind can be thought as a separated entity. So the theory of mind is the ability to understand another person's intention or desires, beliefs, emotions, motivations, and generally thoughts. Theory of mind is also considered a solution, as I said, to the philosophical problem of understanding the other mind. How do people understand one another in the course of interaction? Online, but in the same meaning when we are talking or discussing on making a choice together or looking at something at the same time. Or offline when we read about other person doing something in a novel, for instance. Of course, I think that psychometric measures can be regarded as a sort of, from a psychological viewpoint, instead that just as a test of linguistic skills. So what I'm trying to do, what I did, and what I try to do still, is to look at the test not just as a measure of skills or abilities or linguistic abilities, but as a measure of differences in relevant social behaviors. And one of the main problems looking at theory of mind is whether theory of mind can be considered just a universalistic construct. All humans are equal, wherever they are born, in theory of mind and social cognition, or alternatively, there might be some core element or common element, but there are also relevant differences. Just a few other words about contributions in recent research in cultural psychology, essentially social and cultural psychology, about social cognition, emphasize differences in attributional modes. That means something related to causal attributions. Why did she move that table in that moment, or why did she say to him that instead of another thing? And or did he behave correctly in that situation? So Miller in 1984, John Miller said that tried to demonstrate that different cultures judge differently according to a different cognitive process, the same situation, the same social situation. Self-schemata, this is a very famous theory of Marcus and Kitayama about the idea that we develop different self-ideas or self-schemes according to where we are born and socialized. Construal and maintenance of a person's social image, there is a great debate about cultural honor and cultural face, cultural dignity in social and cultural psychology, as well as it came from anthropology, basically. And symptomatic correlates of social cognition. I mentioned a recent article from an Italian university, a group involving an Italian researcher, a researcher working in Italy, in Padua, Dr. Mas, and a comparison between Japanese and Italians in preferences for adjectives or verbs or other relational terms. Cultural verb use and cognitive styles. Massoud and Nisbet. Nisbet is a very famous expert of difference in cognitive styles worldwide, especially between Eastern, so-called Eastern and Western cognitive styles. And contextually responsive agency, the deontic reasoning about moral aspects of behavior. This is a field of expertise also John Miller and Wellman and others. Okay, so I try to go ahead to the empirical part of the study. Just I wanted to give you the idea that there is a lot of theory, there is a lot of empirical research and a lot of theory in psychology about the different way people might activate meanings and processes when they face a social situation. About theory of mind, more specifically, I chose to quotation from a recent article on Science. Present research suggests that print reading is more and mind reading is less uniform across cultures. So while we can have the same identical abilities in reading a page, our way of getting meaning or making sense of that page can vary more intensively across cultures. And everyday understanding of mental states and intentional actions encompasses the appreciation that such states and actions are responsive to the context in which the agent is situated. So here this quotation is to emphasize the fact that cultural differences are not unrelated to context, of course. And basically the most interesting research does not define just a typical mind in a place, but how people behave according to the different situations and contexts where they operate, where they are requested to make a decision or to act in general. Okay, I don't want to enter too much in a debate about theory of mind because it's pretty much complicated. I mean, it's pretty complicated for me, and there are different theories, and it is still ongoing, and there are even competing theory about what drives equality or what create differences in theory of mind at individual or at group level. So entering my empirical investigation, my idea was trying to approach, according to social cognitive categories and theory of mind categories, the test of of knowledge of the Italian language, or the competence of the Italian language. And I used the data from 2016, the last year of the middle school, the first period of secondary school, and there was a text from Elsa Morante, a short story, La prima della classe. I'm sorry, but I use Italian in this case. I mean, the first in my class, something like this. And an expository essay with a kind of scientific content about demographic issues of developing and developed countries according to the increasing world population, and a small grammar section of 10 test items. I analyzed first data from all the regions, but given my aim and considering that there was also a statistical test confirming that Calabria and Sicily were extreme in a kind of response pattern, looking at the way they answer to all questions, to all items, and they were opposite in a way to Lombardy. Balancing with the consideration, Lombardy is a very big Italian region on the north, and it is also characterized by by population with mixed origins. I decided to compare essentially north and south using. Okay, here I have 3 regions: Piemonte, Lombardy, and Veneto, compared to the north, and Campania, Calabria, and Sicily. And you can see that in the graph, the partial score, the partial raw score at the INVALSI test is higher for the south. I was pretty surprised because I read the newspaper sometimes. I made a huge mistake, and I learned that the Calabrian and Sicilian are not able to read the text generally, and I discovered that they read better Elsa Morante, which is not that easy to me. I mean, I like Elsa Morante very much, but it takes time, concentration, and something like that in reading Elsa Morante. And they score better than students from the great region of Lombardy. I'm sorry, I'm not ironic that much. I mean, in a way, I'm challenged the way newspapers sometimes media communicate results of data, and I'm not challenging in this case INVALSI data. But on the contrary, they perform. Students from southern region perform really worse in the explicatory or scientific, in this case, reading or answering items about a scientific test. And there is a more balanced situation, about grammar skills, according to those 10 questions. So what kind of patterns can be found? First of all, there is a certain synchrony in the way of answering question. The number on the top of the picture, I don't have. Okay, are A1 to A18 are the items, the test items, and it is in this case these are the differences between the regional and national percentage of correct answers. So it's just descriptive statistics. The difference more or less from the national average computed for the three regions of the south, the main regions of the south that I consider Campania, Calabria and Sicily, and the main regions of the north, Piedmont, Lombardy and Veneto. And it is already clear that item number A14 has something strange. I mean, regions of the south have show a great performance. Students more than 15% more of correct answers in that question, and the opposite, less than 10% of the national average in the north. And then there are other items showing opposite patterns, opposite behavior in this case. This is related to, okay, so I have to run now, and I measured, this is related to the grammar section. This is difficult to read, but it shows that okay, we go. This is different item functioning estimation, and it shows that which items show a differential item function. That means that given the same level of ability, the student has a greater likelihood to answer correctly if he leaves for the brown or clear colors. A7, A10, A12, A14 are all biased in favor of the south. The same for B3, B5, B13, C1, C2 and C10. The darkest are the most biased items. The light dark are just biased, but not that much. And the opposite with the blues are biased in favor of Lombardy, because this exercise is already done with Lombardy against or Sicily and Calabria, the extreme south against Lombardy. So there are biased items, and these are some samples. Item number A7. Here, the author used, talking about herself, expression like I'm a phenomenon of the creation, I'm a genius, or something like this. And the item has to understand whether this is what kind of language is it, what she wants to, she implicitly wants to say. Here, the advantage is small. It's not that big, but it's for extreme south. They understand irony. There are much more students with a difficulty in understanding that the autobiographic position of Elsa Morante was ironic. And I used aspect 6 of INVALSI at the end of the figure. There are the way I try to categorize this item. You will see at the end. In terms of the kind of cognitive process involving implicit or explicit, global or local, what subject is the question about, and figurative or alternative, literal language. Another item in favor of the South is what does the expression frivoli capannelli, I can translate it in English, mean? This is another item where the bias is pretty much important for the South, and it works for all the distribution of abilities. Okay, and this is, on the contrary, an item where there's no bias, and I just show this to introduce the next one. In this case, the item asks about a mental state of another person in the reading. Egli pareva, was a peer, a school companion of Elsa Morante. He looks like to be issato in a kind of superiority air, and in which this kind of things did not matter at all. And there's no significant difference in understanding this point, which is a kind of belief about amore, the name of the fictional name of the friend of Elsa Morante when she was young. But there is then an interesting advantage for the South in understanding the adjectives used in the next two sentences, talking about an action, amore, acted toward Elsa. She touched her ecstatics or erupted. Well, this is very interesting because the rate of correct answer is very low, and I was really surprised from this, because the idea was just to guess which of the adjectives are synonyms. And just 36% of the Italian students answer correctly, but the percentage is about 55. Is above chance in the South, is below chance. It's dramatically below chance in the North. So they make probably confusion. And okay, this is 1 minute. Okay. I don't tell you I tell you the interpretation together with this one, which is a question about grammar. My interpretation is that in the first, in this case, it is the context where static and erupted is located, but it is also, and I cannot measure which one of the two is most important, the nature of the word. Static and erupted are not just adjectives, are relational words, are used in a sentence, in a phrase, in a verb phrase, and stands for connotating the relation between the two persons. On the contrary, arguto and gioviale are two stable trait attributes, a kind of personality traits, even if they are applied to an object, the eye and the benevolence, an abstract quality of amore. The same thing or similar interpretation, it might be attempted to explain why the South has this striking advantage in answering the question C1, where the adjective to be identified can be considered not just an adjective, but an adjective word giving a relational meaning in relation to an implicit referent. Where is the police officer? Is near the station. It sounds like a request of an information and an answer to a request of an information. It is important. There is a kind of subject. It is near the station in relation to someone else, which is the action, the agent interested in a possible action. Okay, this violates to some extent the idea that just that cultural differences are much more important when there are long narratives, because I found that even in questions investigating grammar, that might be cultural explanation. About cultural explanation, social cognitive categories and process-based interpretation of la prima della classe, there is an advantage of the South for the so-called one second, for the South here is blue, and in items involving implicit cognition, and there is a bias for for the North, for the Lombardy, for explicit cognition. What does it mean? It means that if the test designer asks where to look for to identify a meaning, a word in the text, there students for Lombardy looks much more expert in searching. But when the problem is to understand an implicit meaning, which is not said in the text, it seems that Southern students are better than their colleagues. Another advantage is in answering questions about another person in the plot, in the story, not Elsa Morante, who is the protagonist in the autobiographic story, but another single individual in the story, understanding the state of mind of the other individual, like Amore in this case. And the other important factor, global attention and difference, seems to advantage students from the South, with a relevant exception. I cannot talk now about that. It's interesting because I think that perhaps I disagree with the test designer in that case, in the interpretation of an item. But this is finally the way the results can be understood looking at the INVALSI category, quando di riferimento, the QDR or INVALSI. The advantage of the southern regions, specifically Sicily and Calabria, is on aspect 5, reconstructing the meaning of a part of the text by integrating several information and concepts and formulating complex inferences. But it should be perhaps related also just on the advantage they show in the literary fiction narrative. No, in this case, there is also in the scientific reading. So, just to conclude with a few line of explanations, what is my view? It seems that 8th graders in Sicily and Calabria grasp better than other Italian students the implicit meanings of words and expressions which refer to actions, immediate perception of a situation described as a contingent and dynamic unfolding. Something that is going to happen, and they can figure out immediately better than the others. On the other hand, they are comparatively less capable than 8th graders from Lombardy to capture the meaning of post-hoc self-reflection, general self-reflection about the situation, when they don't imply understanding figurative language, but they imply a kind of analytical thinking, an analysis of the text. Southern 8th graders apparently prefer attending more holistically and show a greater ability to integrate different kinds of visual elements within the field to construct a meaning. This is an example that I didn't show here at item B3, where they had to grasp the meaning of a line in a graph by integrating the title of the graph with the line. So they had to integrate the information coming from two different sources, but within the same picture, in the title and the graph, and the figure, and the line within the figure. Students in Lombardy might have an advantage in emotionally detached tasks, searching, scatter explicit information within one or more paragraphs, or making an analytical reconstruction of the global meaning, as I said before, actually. And I advanced the hypothesis, I put forward the hypothesis that preferences for analytical or contextual and holistic categorization modes have been tested on students. Okay, this is what I studied, student samples by Knight and Nisbet. And these results perhaps the only one research, empirical research that someone else from some scholar of cultural psychology did in Italy confirm this kind of, is aligned with this kind of explanation of a much more analytical and much more holistic tendency in categorizing between North and South. It might be that cultural diversity springs from a social preference for mentalizing motivations and emotions, either through dynamic representation, quasi-pictorial sensory perception of events, or through alternatively stable traits in the North, in Lombardy. In the South, mentalizing is in a contextual, relational, and highly figurative mode helps to communicate in ways that maintain social relations. This is my hypothesis, of course, it's taken from the literature, it's not just my idea. Literature not about Southern Italy, but about similar, possibly similar cultural context, by avoiding destructive conflicts. Conversely, in Lombardy, a social preference for qualifying person's mind in terms of stable traits may help to avoid unfolding descriptions by steering judgments towards clarity and stability. He is in that way, she is in that way. Therefore, she behaved in a way, he behaves in another way. Okay, thank you.